Hello and welcome to Music for Midlife Geek using Photoshop Episode 1. I'm Jay White, and today we're going to talk about using the camera raw dialog and layer blend modes to enhance our image non-destructively. And we're going to use, I have this nice image of a calf, happens to be a moose, and it's a pretty good picture, but there are some things we can do in Photoshop Raw and in the Photoshop itself using blend modes that can really make this picture pop. So let's go ahead and hit enter and open this up in Photoshop Raw to begin with. In the camera raw, the first thing we want to do is adjust the exposure. Generally, by hitting auto, you'll get a pretty good approximation of what you're looking for in terms of a exposure, but I'm going to go ahead and back this off right now to about 0.80 because there's a couple things I want to do in the camera raw dialog to adjust it. The first thing we're going to use the graduated filter. Now the graduated filter works a lot like a neutral density or graduated neutral density filter in the field. So we set the exposure to 1, and as we drag down you can see how it is evening out the exposure across the whole image. So we've made the top much brighter and the bottom pretty much stayed the same. So you see that? Command Z, and there it is again. So let's go ahead and open this image, and we're going to work with it in Photoshop now, finish it off. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and unlock the background layer by dragging and dropping the lock. And I'm going to go ahead and double click that, rename it base. And let's duplicate this layer, of course, like we always want to do. We're having good protocol in Photoshop. We'll call it edit and turn off our base. Now, we could do a lot of things. We want to brighten this image up a little bit more. We could use, for example, an exposure adjustment layer or a levels adjustment layer. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer by right-clicking and saying duplicate layer, which of course you could drag it onto the new icon as well. And I'm going to call this lighten. And we're going to go ahead and take our blend modes, and you'll notice there's a whole bunch of blend modes here, but the one we're going to focus on is screen. You can see automatically we get a much lighter picture, and our moose is looking pretty good. So we zoom in on it. Yeah, she's looking pretty good. Now, I'm thinking that it's a female calf moose because usually by now males are getting their horns. They're in velvet, as we say. But I'm not promising you this is a female moose, but I do know it's a calf. So we like this, and we like what we have, but you know what? I think we might want to crop this image a little bit. Let me zoom out here. Let's crop this to make it a little more interesting. I need to close bridge down. There we go. Let's crop this to make it a little more interesting. I usually like to go ahead and use my my guides when I'm doing a crop, just to get a general idea of what I'm looking for and kind of make it as even as possible. Go ahead and use my crop tool. And you'll notice that I have my crop tool set on the rule of thirds. You do have some choices. You can just have a plain old grid, or you can say none, right? Or of course you can say rule of thirds. So we've kind of put our moose down there in the lower left hand side of the image, kind of off center a little bit. Let's go ahead and hit enter, and there's our image. Now let's zoom in a little bit. Now by lightening, the first thing you'll notice we did was we made these trees back here almost washed out the quaking aspen and the red willows, which are a tasty treat for a moose. They like red willows. But we want to increase the contrast. Let's go ahead and duplicate the lighten layer. And this one we're going to call contrast. And push enter. And now, because by default that layer previously that we just copied was on lighten, we applied screen again. But let's go ahead and take a look at some things we can do. One neat thing would be to hit multiply. It would really darken everything up but crank in the contrast. But it makes our moose really dark. You know, I kind of like the way the background looks here, so why don't we go ahead and hit the layer mask, or of course there's always Command Q or Control Q on a Windows machine to create a new layer mask. And let's zoom in on our moose here, and let's go ahead and mask her back out. Okay, so, and layer masking is a good technique to have in your toolbox, especially when you're working with blend modes. Layer blend modes, because you know sometimes you might want to really enhance the sky of a picture, or really enhance the the ground, and you can just mask out the whole thing and only adjust the sky using blend modes. And it can be very dramatic if you do it that way, depending on how you do it. So yeah, we're bringing our moose out. You know what? I'm starting to think as I mask this moose out that maybe multiply is a bit too much. So let's quickly change our blend mode over to soft light. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I'm gonna go ahead and let our moose pop out the way we want it here. There we go. And let's zoom out and take a look at this. Oh, that's looking pretty good. Now, there's a couple more things we can do. One thing I want to do is add a vignetting effect. You'll notice in this picture right now, there seems to be this hay. This is actually some kind of hay carrier, old-fashioned time, when you see the pulley. And it's drawing your eye up to the center of the image. And yeah, I know I could use content-aware fill or some kind of painting and get rid of it, but I really don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to create a vignetting effect. And I know there are a lot of different ways to create vignetting effects in Photoshop, but I'm going to do this really quick and easily by using a gradient layer. Go ahead and open up our gradient layer. As you can see, it's by default in linear. I'm going to make it radial, and I'm going to go ahead and reverse it. And then while you're in the gradient fill mode, or if you just double click and come back to it, you can drag the focus of your gradient where you want it. And in fact, in this case, let's go ahead and make it a little bit smaller. Let's make it about 65%. I'll go 60. Yeah, it's too much. To 75%. Now that's perfect. Now let's get our moose kind of nice and centered in our vignetting effect. And there you go. Now you do have some choices here. I'm just going to use overlay, and you can see that it's really popped out. Now, I like this look. It's very kind of artsy, fartsy looking, but we probably don't want to keep it that way because everything's gotten a little purpley. Although our moose looks great, her eye is now drawn to that moose in the lower left center of the image. So let's go ahead and adjust our opacity to make this just not quite so dramatic. Let's move it down to about 60%. It's hard to do with a trackpad, you know that. Okay, and so it's a little less purpley, but it's the picture we're looking for. So there you go. There's some really simple and quick techniques you can use to enhance an image in Photoshop without using any destructive methods. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we're going to have another one again real soon. Thanks.